We are on part two of our kind of Blue Yonder special of the LogiPharma podcast. Tiffany, you obviously joined us before and kind of gave a lovely introduction. But Tab, it'd be great to kind of hear a bit about you, how long you've been working at Blue Yonder, your role, all the fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So great to be on the pod. My name's Tab Dayani. I lead development of our sustainability products at Blue Yonder. Our solutions focus on, embedding sustainability within supply chain management across transportation, procurement, facilities, end-to-end planning across both the planning and execution processes. Right? There's so much cool stuff because Blue Yonder sits at the epicenter of supply chain management, where so much of this impact occurs. Over 60% of global carbon emissions come from the supply chain. So we're in a really good position to be able to help our customers solve a lot of those issues. So a little bit about me too is, so I've spent the last 10 plus years at the intersection of sustainability, supply chain, and technology, and helping customers solve the various challenges associated with the intersection of that Venn diagram. So excited to talk about that as it relates to pharma, an industry that I have a lot of experience in. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Amazing. I mean, Tiffany, you touched on the last episode about how you've kind of always kind of had kind of your foot in the door at pharma. Is that the kind of same with you, Tab? Kind of, or was it kind of a later kind of jump in there with the sustainability?
Yeah, actually, my initial involvement with pharma as an industry was not necessarily sustainability focused. In a previous life, certain consulting projects that I worked on were actually in various parts of the pharma supply chain process, from procurement to transportation to digital transformation. So my initial foray into life sciences as an industry kind of began with that, but I've always been kind of heavily tied in from a sustainability angle as well. Even back in my consulting days, I was always trying to shoehorn sustainability into projects, even if it wasn't asked about. So yeah.
Absolutely. Amazing. I guess it's one of those industries that kind of, when I chat to people when we're on site at LogiPharma, they were like, oh, well, I just didn't realize that this role was like a thing when you're at school. No one kind of tells you, but it's kind of a happy accident that you're able to kind of dip your toe in, and suddenly there's this amazing industry where people are just so people focused despite all the kind of growth of technology and kind of the big kind of aims. It's really nice. I guess we touched on tech there ever so slightly, but I guess we have chatted about AI in our last episode, but it'd be great to kind of do that kind of touch point of how does AI improve demand forecasting, inventory management, and then we're going to get into all things sustainability.
Yep. So, I think with AI and how it's impacting demand planning. So there's a lot going on with demand planning in pharma, right? So, I think when we talked about this on the AI specific session, we were talking about everything that impacts demand for pharma, and it just happened. It just so happens that there's a lot going on with the regulatory agencies. Of course, we know regulations impact really every single part of pharmaceutical supply chain, every single part of a pharmaceutical manufacturer. And that impacts demand as well. So, regulations impact demand. We also have those third-party payers and insurers really impacting demand. There's also things that are kind of going on with tender management that impacts demand in a way that's quite different from most other industries. And then you have, everything that's going on, whether it's demographics or like aging population, right? As we know, and hey, now we have different areas of the world that are able to afford things in a way, and that certainly plays into health equity, right? Which is part of sustainability. So now we have that's also impacting demand. So it's very wide ranging. And how do you really, bring that into your demand forecast? Well, it's through AI, because there's no possible way that the human mind can take into account all of those factors. You have to have that helper in AI.
Anything there, Tab, from your side, or is it kind of just
I think it's similar where it's like, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit
Yeah.
too, where there's so many benefits of AI as it relates to just making supply chains more efficient. And, that natural efficiency also results in improvements from a sustainability perspective too. You're reducing waste, you're reducing miles traveled, you're reducing the energy required to over manufacture products that, don't get used, right? So when we think about the potential there, even, not only from a demand planning perspective and the ability to improve performance against traditional supply chain KPIs, there's also huge alignment with like the new age sustainability KPIs that now the supply chain teams are becoming more and more accountable for.
Absolutely. And I guess, like, I mean, from my perspective, since kind of going to LogiPharma, there has definitely been a real shift in mindset, and everyone seems a lot more focused on the kind of sustainability goals. Would you kind of agree that kind of in recent years, everyone is kind of taking it a lot more seriously, and we are seeing a lot of progress?
I'd say 100%. I'd say one, especially in the life sciences industries, where I think as an industry, there's been a very high priority on sustainability, which we love to see. But as competitors start to value it, then it increases the pressure of everyone in the field to also value it, because then it becomes a point of like, okay, I have to achieve parity, and then there's additional value with becoming a leader in that space as well, right? So I would say not only from a life sciences industry perspective, but also from a supply chain perspective, where again, like I said, right, so much of that like sustainability impact from a carbon perspective, from a waste perspective, is coming from the supply chain. So it's natural that the evolution of sustainability management within the organization kind of transitions from there's only so much that a sustainability team can do by themselves. They have to work with the supply chain management part of the organization to actually, be able to measure their KPIs, to be able to achieve their decarbonization and waste reduction targets. So we've started to see definitely more attention paid, and I feel like more like an increase in accountability for the right stakeholders who actually control those outcomes that are affecting like the sustainability performance.
And I think the only thing that I would add to that is really just pharmaceutical companies and the way they think about sustainability. Just like Tab was saying, right? They've been on the leading edge of a lot of sustainability initiatives. I mean, in part, that's simply because many pharmaceutical companies are headquartered in Europe, and we know that Europe is pushing the envelope of sustainability. And so that's a big part of it. And, just because of the size of the industry, they tend to be on the leading edge of a lot of initiatives and push the envelope of, a lot of good things that happen. I've kind of seen it really throughout my career. Like I said, I started my career in pharma, and I've seen them push the envelope on things like paid leave and things like that. And hey, now we're into sustainability, and they become an industry to look for in hey, like this is something good that we should all be working towards. And I think that's part of why, you see pharma on the cutting edge of sustainability.
And to add to that too, Tiffany, I think you bring up a good point where, especially in the EU, there's a lot of like regulatory pressure for companies to report against sustainability, be compliant. Companies over a certain size with the CSRD regulation have to report on their carbon emissions. There's emerging regulation, for example, like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is, hey, if you're buying goods from non-EU entities, then you need to account for the carbon that's coming in, because in the EU, there are carbon taxes for manufacturing. Outside of it, there's not, but there's a way to basically say like, hey, you can't just get away with not paying tax by getting stuff from outside the EU. But in addition, right, I think, and what pharma as an industry has done really well is that there are real financial like incentives and disincentives for prioritizing sustainability. A lot of enterprise companies, both pharma and outside of pharma, are already paying for things like carbon offsets and carbon credits. These carbon taxes that are a result of like manufacturing and transportation activity, fuel taxes globally, right? These are real costs. Even other things like financial incentives, for example, the cost of capital can be up to like 0.5% lower for companies that rate higher in their ESG performance and scores, right? And that's like, 0.5% sounds small, but when you're talking about like millions and billions of dollars of debt leverage, right, like that equates to huge amounts of financial consequences, right? So pharma as an industry has done a really good job of like baking these into the equation. I'm already paying for carbon on the back end. Now, it may not be a part of my supply chain process specifically in some instances, but being able to account for it on the front end and actually valuing it as not only like, hey, there's, obviously, yes, it is something positive that we should all, strive towards being sustainable. But at the end of the day, it does impact the bottom line in ways that are kind of unseen and unaccounted for in a lot of organizations. And pharma's done a good job of like baking it into the true cost of doing business, which I think is fantastic.
You guys have just set the stage kind of very perfectly there of kind of the impact it can make. And also, yeah, in Europe we do love a regulation. It seems to be all I kind of write about eventually. But I guess with kind of the stakes rising as well, it kind of like then leads to kind of the impact of tech as well. And that kind of weaves in that conversation we had about AI there. It'd be great to kind of hear how technology is then impacting this and helping the industry become more sustainable, more patient centric, just all these kind of good things that we really are kind of seeing a move towards.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of what Tab just mentioned, right, with that ability to begin measuring on the front end is so important. So, you're just having the ability to, okay, I'm used to maybe seeing my transportation network, and I'm used to now we're starting to be used to seeing our supplier network and our CMO network. Well, now let's add this extra layer digitally of being able to see and then take action on what's happening from a sustainability standpoint. And then, that way, okay, so in some ways you can begin to save money, which is what Tab just kind of talked us through. But in other ways, hey, maybe it's just having that ability to comply with regulations, which is equally important.
Yeah, and I would add that I think that there's so many amazing things that technology, AI included, can do to improve sustainability in supply chains. Like Tiffany mentioned, so much of that impact is coming from supply chains. So to be able to give supply chain leads and managers, both at the highest level and more operationally, the visibility into sustainability KPIs, your impact is driving that. In the same way that, like these supply chain management platforms give insight into like costs, lead times, other metrics of traditional operational efficiency, being able to show sustainability side by side as an additional trade-off, as an additional, like, hey, here's more information to make the right decision holistically for your organization, right, is super powerful. But then even going beyond that, right, doing things like automating measurement is great, but being able to go beyond that and say, hey, here's how you bake it into the before all of your operations happen. Because after a certain point, and I think this is particularly true for pharma as well, once you kind of lock in your supply chain for a new product, right, it's not like, like some different sectors where it's like, hey, I could buy blueberries from anyone. I could go to any contract manufacturer and make a t-shirt. It doesn't really work that way for life sciences, where like after legal reviews and stuff, your supply chain is kind of like locked into a certain extent. So being able to account for, hey, how should I set up my supply chain initially to be the most sustainable, as well as achieve all of my other traditional performance metrics? But then also, how do I, even within certain constraints, model supply chain in a way that bakes in sustainability into the optimization and measurement automation, I think is really kind of a game changer, especially as we see sustainability become a greater and greater priority for these organizations.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I love that you brought up the idea that, hey, it's baked in this. Once you set up your supply chain, your manufacturing setup in pharma, it's going to be a while before you can change that. And when we're talking about a while, it's going to be, at least 3 years before you can literally even add a line within an existing manufacturing plant, much less go to a different manufacturing plant or select a new supplier oh, and by the way, there happens to only be one place where you can get this particular raw material, or one contract manufacturer that makes this product. So it's, it's very important that you do that on the front end. And Megan, we just talked about the importance of proactive versus reactive, and what a great way to actually do that by baking sustainability in on that front end.
Absolutely, yeah. And it leads right back into our chat, almost kind of even just your small tools. We were speaking about kind of how even on ChatGPT you can go in, and that's how people get recipes these days based on what they kind of. So that it shows you sustainability and kind of the small day-to-day things. I guess I feel really lucky to have you guys on the pod, because obviously Blue Yonder are kind of doing so much sustainability wise. I guess it'd be great to know if kind of any advice you have for companies looking to kind of take practical steps to reduce their environmental footprint. Kind of where's the kind of best place to start, I guess.
Yeah, and obviously I'm a little bit biased, but personally, I think that, like within the supply chain, the majority of like pharmaceutical companies, but also like generally most manufacturing industry, like their carbon impact comes from three main sources of activity. It's procurement of purchased goods, so what's happening in your upstream supply chain, companies are actually responsible for that. Procurement of purchased goods, transportation, and then facilities energy use, whether that's owned manufacturing facilities, co-manufacturing facilities, warehouses, and then in the transportation sector, especially if we look at cold chain as well, right? These three activities make up 90% plus for almost any enterprise like pharma companies. That's 90% plus of their impact. So being able to include it in, for example, supply chain planning processes that govern all of these three activities is extremely valuable. When we look at, including it in a new product launch planning, when you're initially setting up those supply chains and being able to do scenario modeling for like, hey, after I set my supply chain up, 80% of the impact is kind of locked. Yes, there's flexibility within that 20% of margins where I can adjust my supply and demand forecasts to reduce waste and emissions, streamline the transportation if I have multiple suppliers or multiple DCs to be most efficient, right? But at the end of the day, being able to bake it into my scenario planning before the supply chain is even generated, so I have the max amount of juice to squeeze, is really, really game changing. And I think that, again, like the more proactive customers, or not customers, but like companies rather, can be, the more they'll be able to achieve those sustainability goals alongside their traditional metrics of success. Because again, I think the equation here isn't like I have to sacrifice on my traditional metrics to achieve sustainability. Yes, in some instances that's true, but at the end of the day, there's a lot that can be done that has a lot of synergy between sustainability and traditional metrics. It's just a matter of including it as a performance metric, which a lot of the times, at least previously, it wasn't considered. So with technology allowing people to consider it as a decision-making element, both reactively from a measurement perspective for compliance purposes, as well as proactively to improve performance, I think is like one of the biggest ways that pharma companies can take action to like really, improve their sustainability performance.
And the one thing that I'll add there too is, when you're thinking about those levers that can be pulled, and really thinking about sustainability as it impacts so many different portions of the supply chain. One thing that we talk a lot about with customers in pharma, just talk about in general when we're talking about the industry, is inventory, and the tendency of pharma to build up inventory, and it's for the right reasons, right? They want to make sure that no patient ever goes unserved, right? Like that's what you're always thinking about when you're a pharma manufacturer. And if you add in that sustainability to a dashboard, to something that you're actually reviewing, and you see, this is causing waste, this is actually negatively impacting my sustainability metrics. It's not only costing us money, but it's impacting our sustainability metrics. So it really allows companies to think about inventory in a little bit of a different way. And, no, we're never going to say, let's have less inventory at the cost of that patient. But maybe you can have less inventory and therefore less waste, while still serving your end patient just as well. So it's that combination of having visibility to sustainability while also improving things like demand and supply planning.
100%. And to build off of that too, like, when we think about like the, just in time deliveries for patients, right? A lot of times it's like, hey, I have to place an order before it's manufactured and then transported to the customer. But how do I make sure that, for example, it gets there in a timely manner, it doesn't spoil on the way, and I don't overproduce when I have to manage, like, it's like I have to keep all these balls juggling, right? Again, proactive planning helps a lot with that, right? One of the initiatives that a lot of pharma companies are taking on right now is the transition from air to ocean, where how do we reduce the expediting of air freight shipments of things like APIs, and transition that to ocean freight, which is more sustainable, but also requires more advanced planning and more accurate supply and demand forecasting, right? And, embedding sustainability within those decision-making processes on the planning side, again, just yields that benefit from a sustainability perspective as well, across initiatives where you may not have even thought it could have that benefit.
Absolutely. I mean, that pretty much answered the next question I was going to ask when you touched on KPIs and kind of, I guess from like a broader, if I had to put on I had to take a step back, would you kind of try to get everyone involved? Is it kind of difficult to get people to kind of be on board with kind of change when it comes to kind of sustainability, or is everyone just really happy to kind of buy into it because they see the kind of long-term impact that it will have and kind of the impact it's going to have? Or I guess that's kind of a lot of like nodding, like it's hard, but everyone knows that it's a good thing in the long run.
No, that's a great question, because I think everyone like understands the importance of it, but then like, day to day when it comes time to like, do the thing, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times it's like, okay, but is this going to hurt my bottom line? And then we're back to like where we started, where it's, but at the end of the day, I think, again, what's encouraging, and I think how technology can really play a role here, is that even operationally, if I'm not someone who cares that much about sustainability, like I'm a transportation planner, my day job is to make sure the trains run on time, right? At the end of the day, I'm not looking at sustainability currently, but even giving visibility into those impacts. What does a shipment via air cost in terms of emissions versus a shipment via ocean? Starting to put these numbers in front of the peoples who are making the decisions, right, starts to give them familiarity where, hey, before they might not have known the cost of the shipment before they started using like a TMS tool, but now they know because they're looking at it every day, right? In the same way, if you start to give more regular visibility, it starts to become ingrained more into the DNA of the organization, right? If you start to embed it within the decision-making process, so it's not just something that's contained within the silo and we try to do a good job when we can, but rather it's in front of you every day, and whether or not that is your primary decision-making factor, spoiler alert, it never is the primary decision-making factor, but it can be one of them, right? The more we can ingrain it into these processes that are already happening, and the less we can keep it as like a siloed, try to do it when we can, the more successful companies are able to be.
I really was thinking the same thing, right, about those siloed decisions. And, when you have processes that are first in place, having an IBP or an SNOP type of process in place, but then actually, making it easier with a technology like an IBP tool, like an IBP technology, and you have that visibility to sustainability through a process like that, and everyone is working towards those same goals rather than, like Tab said, like your supply planner, your transportation planner is making his decisions in a silo and someone else is making their decisions in a silo. Well, now you're putting it all together in one place and you're all making decisions that benefit the company as a whole. That's just what technology can do. And I think it's the next phase.
And the thing is, I think even if you're looking at all the stuff and you still make it's like I have to choose, right? I am making the non-sustainable decision. That's now a choice that I have to make with the information that I am enabled to like see it's the less sustainable choice, rather than I don't even know and I'm not thinking about it, right? One's clearly an improvement. And even taking those types of steps forward allows it to be more and more like giving sustainability a seat at the table and becoming embedded within the operations from a supply chain perspective, again, as opposed to like just a siloed initiative that's done when it can be approached.
It's kind of like your Apple Watch, right? Like some days I just know I'm not going to be able to hit that goal. But at least I can see it and I can plan to do better tomorrow.
Exactly.
Yeah. And even if it's going to buzz me to say, why aren't you moving? I can ignore it. I know I'm going to do it tomorrow. It's fine. Amazing. I guess we did the big questions in the last episode, but I guess with a sustainability hat on, it'd be great to know if there's any kind of misconceptions about the pharma supply chain that you'd like to clear up when it comes to sustainability. I guess many assume that that's kind of in sustainability and pharma supply chain. It kind of comes at an expense of efficiency, but that we've seen is kind of a bit false there. It only enhances. But if you guys have any kind of misconceptions for the listeners, I'm sure they'd love to hear them.
I think my misconception is going to be similar to the one that I was talking about with that inventory piece and, having inventory, always having maybe even more inventory than is needed because you want to be absolutely sure you're serving that end patient. I think a misconception is that inventory is actually going to help you serve the end patient. Sometimes you can have too much and it's expired, so it wasn't going to help in the first place. And just then tying that to, hey, this is not only not going to help me with my goal, but I'm also going to be not meeting my sustainability goals in the process. So that's what I would say is the biggest misconception.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Tiffany and with what you said earlier about like sustainability, profitability, and efficiency are somehow like mutually exclusive. A lot of times it's just a matter of there's a solution that will work for all three. You just have to make sure you're looking at it.
100%. And yeah, as I kind of say, I was biased, but we love kind of having Blue Yonder here because you guys are doing so much for sustainability. So it's really great. And we love it at the event as well. It'd be great kind of if you could leave us with any one piece of advice you'd give to leaders when it comes to sustainability for pharma supply chains.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
everyone's ready. They've got some.
No, it's a good question. I'd say like again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but the more proactive you can be, the better. Because at a certain point, there's only so much impact you can do once everything's kind of locked up. Once you're getting into the reactive, you're really at a certain point just measuring it, and you can make all the micro adjustments you want. But at the end of the day, if a lot of life sciences companies have set very aggressive decarbonization targets, 30% carbon reduction by 2030. 90% carbon reduction by 2040 or 2050. These changes don't happen overnight. They require, hey, even if this year, like I can't meet that goal immediately, well, I still have to, make like it's incremental progress. I still have to reduce my carbon emissions by 5% year over year to hit my target. And that doesn't happen. You might be able to do that in year one by being reactive and making those micro adjustments. But years 2, 3, 4, once you've squeezed all of that, you get 5% by being reactive. To get to 90%, you got to be proactive, and that journey needs to start today. So I guess my advice would be proactive about including sustainability in your planning decisions and including it as part of your digital transformation so that it can become part of your core operating DNA.
And I would just say, on top of that, just the conversation that we just had a few minutes ago, including everyone, right? So having some kind of mechanism that the entire organization is working towards the same goal rather than having your transportation planner need to plan for only transportation goals, right? Making sure that goals are aligned across the organization.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Tab and Tiffany, for coming on the LogiPharma podcast. It was great to kind of hear from a Blue Yonder perspective. And if you want to kind of learn more about Blue Yonder, you can find the website, LinkedIn. I'm sure that you guys have lots of resources that people can go find. And we will see everyone at Blue Yonder at LogiPharma, all the kind of, you're going to the North American one. We've got kind of Connect coming up and the LSE, so we'll have lots of fun there. But thanks so much for your time.